They say that in accounting, silence is golden. It means the numbers balance, the audits are clean, and the intricate, invisible machinery of a multi-billion-dollar corporation is humming along as it should. For 25 years, I was the master of that silence. My name is Seth. At Sterling Maxwell Financial, I wasn't just in the accounting department. For a long time, I was the accounting department. I was the architect, the plumber, and the janitor of a system so complex, so flawlessly integrated that the executives on the top floor probably thought it ran on magic. They mistook its quiet efficiency for simplicity. They mistook my silence for compliance. They were wrong on both counts. If you've ever poured your entire professional life into one place, you know the feeling. The building becomes a part of you. The low hum of the servers in the basement is a familiar heartbeat. The smell of stale coffee and industrial-grade carpet cleaner is, in a weird way, the smell of home. You build relationships that are deeper than just colleagues, they're foxhole buddies. You've been through market crashes, hostile takeover attempts, and brutal internal restructurings together. You know who's solid, who panics, and who's just putting on a show. I thought I knew this place. I thought my loyalty, my quarter-century of silent, ceaseless competence had earned me a permanent place in its DNA. That was my first mistake. My second was underestimating the profound, destructive power of a man with a freshly printed MBA and a deep-seated fear of anyone who actually knew how things worked. His name was Carlton Vance. He arrived like a storm front you see on the horizon, all dark clouds and bluster, promising a cleansing rain, but really just packing hail and flash floods. He was the new chief financial officer, hired from some venture capital firm that specialized in disruptive streamlining, which is a fancy way of saying they bought healthy companies, stripped them for parts, and sold the hollowed-out carcass for a quick profit. He was maybe 35, with a haircut that cost more than my first car and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. His vocabulary was a weaponized stream of buzzwords: synergy, optimization, paradigm shifts, leveraging core competencies. He spoke in paragraphs, but he never actually said anything. From our first meeting, I knew I was an endangered species. I sat in his cavernous office, the one that used to belong to old Mr. Abernathy, a man who started in the mailroom and knew every employee's name. Carlton didn't look at me. He looked at the file on his desk that was supposed to summarize my existence. He saw Senior Director of Internal Audits and Systems, saw my age, saw my salary, and his brain, a finely tuned abacus of ruthless cost-benefit analysis, saw only a liability. He said, "Seth, it's a pleasure. I've heard you're the institutional memory around here." He said it like he was talking about a dusty museum exhibit. I just nodded. What was I supposed to say? That this institutional memory was the only thing stopping a cascade failure in our payroll system every third quarter? That I was the only person left who understood the archaic but still critical code that handled our legacy pension funds? I just said I'd do my best to keep the ship running smoothly. His smile tightened. "Well, we're not a ship anymore, Seth. We're a rocket, and we need to shed any unnecessary weight to achieve liftoff." That was the beginning of the end. It was a slow, methodical erasure. My team was downsized, my projects were defunded, and my access levels were quietly, almost imperceptibly curtailed. Meetings I used to lead were now meetings I was merely invited to, then meetings I just received the minutes for. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts. Competence isn't cheap until you lose it. They were about to learn that lesson the hard way. The discovery happened on a Tuesday night. I was working late, not because I was asked to, but out of habit, out of a sense of duty that in retrospect was hopelessly naive. I was reconciling some intercompany transfers, a routine part of the quarterly closing process, but something was off. A series of transactions with a new offshore holding company in a jurisdiction famous for its opacity. The numbers were immense, disguised as capital investments in a subsidiary that, as far as I knew, consisted of a mailbox and a brass plaque. It was elegant. I had to give him that. A beautifully constructed lie built within the very system I had designed for transparency. It was a massive, multi-year tax fraud scheme, siphoning tens of millions of dollars out of the company's declared profits and into a black hole. It was audacious, arrogant, and it had Carlton Vance's fingerprints all over it. The digital signatures, the authorization codes, they all led back to him. The knot in my stomach wasn't just fear. It was a cold, sickening sense of violation. He had used my creation, my life's work, as the weapon to commit a felony. I spent the next 2 days in a state of quiet dread. I knew what I had to do. I had to go to the board, to the internal audit committee. But I also knew Vance. He wasn't just a crook. He was a political animal. He had the CEO's ear. He would have a story ready. He would paint me as a disgruntled old-school accountant who couldn't keep up with modern finance, who was misinterpreting the data out of incompetence or malice. And then I found the final piece. He had backdated several of the key transfers, making it look like they had been authorized months before he even joined the company, right under my watch. He was building a firewall, and I was going to be the sacrifice. He was going to frame me. On Friday morning, I got the email from Human Resources. A mandatory meeting, 10 a.m. Carlton Vance's office. I didn't even have to open it. I knew. I walked to that office like a man walking to his own execution. The air felt thick. The familiar hum of the building sounded like a funeral dirge. I walked past my team's desks, the few that were left, and gave a small nod to David, my most trusted deputy, a young man I'd hired right out of college 10 years ago. He looked at me with worried eyes. He knew too. I sat in the same chair as before. This time there was a woman from HR beside him, a nervous-looking person who refused to make eye contact. Carlton didn't even bother with the file. He leaned forward, all feigned sincerity and predatory calm. "Seth," he began, "as you know, the company is undergoing a significant strategic realignment. We're optimizing our human capital to meet the challenges of a new fiscal landscape." He delivered the lines like he'd rehearsed them. "Unfortunately, as part of this restructuring, your position has been eliminated, effective immediately." I just stared at him. The sheer unmitigated gall of it. He had found my discovery. He must have had some kind of alert on those files. He saw that I had accessed the records, and he pulled the trigger before I could. He wasn't just firing me. He was discrediting his only witness before the witness even knew he was going to testify. The HR woman slid a thick folder across the desk. "Your severance package," she mumbled, "standard for your tenure. It includes a non-disclosure agreement and a non-compete clause." I didn't touch it. I just looked at Carlton. My mind was a whirlwind of rage, of fear, of 25 years of loyalty turning to ash in my mouth. But on the outside, I was perfectly still. That was the one thing my father always taught me. He'd spent 40 years on an assembly line, a union man through and through. He'd say, "Seth, never let them see you sweat. The moment you show them emotion, they think they've won. Your face is your last line of defense." So I kept my face a mask of calm professionalism. I said, "I understand." My lack of a reaction seemed to unnerve him more than any outburst would have. He was expecting me to yell, to plead, to threaten. That's what people did, but I just stood up, nodded once to the HR woman, and said, "Thank you for your time." I turned and walked out of his office, not looking back. I could feel his eyes on my back, a mixture of triumph and I hoped a tiny sliver of confusion, a tiny sliver of fear. He'd won the battle, but he had no idea what kind of war he had just started. As I walked to my desk with a security guard already waiting to escort me out, a single cold thought crystallized in my mind. He thinks he's erased me, but he just handed me the one thing I didn't have before, nothing left to lose. The walk out of that building was the longest of my life. Every step was a ghost of a memory. The elevator where I'd celebrated landing our first major international account. The lobby where I'd brought my daughter in for a Bring Your Kid to Work day 15 years ago. The security guard, a man named Frank, whose kid's college graduations I'd heard all about, couldn't look me in the eye as he took my ID badge. He just mumbled, "Sorry, Seth." He held a cardboard box with a few personal items from my desk, a coffee mug my wife had given me, a picture of my family, a worn-out stress ball shaped like a number 1. I was an institution 1 minute and a box of trinkets the next. I didn't say a word. I just walked out into the cold November air and didn't look back. The drive home is a blur. It's funny, the things you notice when your world implodes, the rhythmic thump-thump of the tires on the pavement, the way the sunlight glinted off the windshield of the car in front of me. Mundane details in the face of absolute catastrophe. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. I wasn't shaking, I was solid, a block of ice. The emotional shock had frozen everything solid. I pulled into my driveway and just sat in the car for a long time, the engine off, the silence deafening. This was my home, the one I'd paid for with 25 years of early mornings and late nights, the one I'd nearly missed my daughter's first steps for because I was closing out a fourth quarter. And for what? To be discarded like a used-up pen. The ice began to crack, not with a bang, but with a slow, grinding ache in my chest. It was the feeling of betrayal. It's a physical thing. It feels like swallowing glass. When I finally walked inside, my wife Maria was there. She took one look at my face and the cardboard box in my hand, and she knew. She didn't have to ask. She just came over, took the box from my hand, set it on the floor, and wrapped her arms around me. And that's when the dam broke. I didn't sob or scream. It was just a long, slow exhale of breath that I felt like I'd been holding for a quarter of a century. All that pressure, all that responsibility, all that misplaced loyalty just gone. I leaned my head on her shoulder, a 53-year-old man feeling like a lost little boy. She just held me, her hand rubbing my back, saying nothing, which was everything I needed. Later that evening, after a dinner I barely tasted, I went down to my workshop in the basement. It's my sanctuary. It's where I restore old furniture. I like the certainty of it. You take something broken, scarred, and forgotten, and with patience and skill you make it whole again. You strip away the old varnish, you sand down the imperfections, you find the true grain of the wood underneath. Tonight I just stood there, running my hand over a half-finished oak chest. The smell of sawdust and mineral spirits was a balm. My phone buzzed. It was David. I almost didn't answer, but I did. His voice was low, conspiratorial. "Seth, are you okay?" "I'm fine, David, just processing." "It's chaos here," he said. "Vance held a department-wide meeting after you left. Said you were leaving to pursue other opportunities, a voluntary retirement." The lie was so blatant, so insulting, it was almost impressive. "I bet he did," I said, my voice flat. "Nobody's buying it, Seth. We all know what he's been doing, pushing you out. He's paranoid. He's been asking IT to track keyword searches in the internal network, words like fraud, offshore, investigation." My blood ran cold. So that's how he knew. He wasn't just a crook, he was a proactive one. He'd set a digital tripwire, and I'd walked right into it. "Listen to me, David," I said, my voice hardening. "Don't do anything stupid. Don't be a hero. Just do your job. Keep your head down and watch your back. This guy is dangerous." "I know, Seth, but this isn't right. You built this whole damn department." "I know," I said. "Just be careful." I hung up, a new, colder fear mixing with the anger. Vance wasn't just trying to cover his tracks. He was actively hunting for anyone who might know. David was in his line of fire now. My problems had become his problems. The next few days were a blur of numb routine. I tried to read the severance agreement. It was a masterpiece of legal jargon designed to intimidate and silence. The non-compete was absurdly broad, effectively barring me from working in finance anywhere on the East Coast for 2 years. The non-disclosure was ironclad. If I so much as mentioned Sterling Maxwell's internal workings to a new employer, they could sue me into oblivion. It was a cage. But the part that made my blood boil was the pension. I was 3 months shy of my full vesting date, 3 months away from a lifetime of security. By firing me, not laying me off, they had legally voided it. They weren't just taking my future, they were stealing my past. That night, I called my father. He's 80 now, living in a small condo down in Florida. He'd worked for a steel company in Pennsylvania his whole life. A big, strong man who was slowly being worn down by age and a bad hip. "Hey, Pop," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "Seth, what's wrong?" He could always tell. 40 years on a factory floor gave you a pretty good ear for the sound of trouble. I told him everything. The firing, the fraud, Vance, the pension. I just laid it all out, the words tumbling out of me. When I was done, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint sound of the ocean through his open window. He finally spoke, his voice gravelly but clear. They did the same to us, you know. Not with computers and offshore accounts, but with paperwork and lawyers. The company went bankrupt, declared it on a Friday. On Monday, they opened up under a new name with half the workforce and no pension liabilities. We lost everything. 40 years of sweat, gone. I remember, Pop. I was just a kid, but I remember. I fought them, he said. The union fought them. We picketed. We went to court. It didn't matter. They had the better lawyers. They had the system on their side. They always do. He paused again. But you, Seth, you're different. You're not a millwright. You're one of them. You know how they think. You built the machine they're trying to use against you. What am I supposed to do, Pop? They've got me legally cornered. If I leak what I know, they'll say it's sour grapes from a fired employee. They'll bury me in court, and Vance will walk. He was silent for another moment. Then he said the words that would change everything, the words that turned my grief into fuel. Son, a man like that, a man who steals for a living, he lives in constant fear. His biggest weakness isn't what he's done, it's what he's afraid. You know he's done. He doesn't think you're a threat anymore, he thinks he won. An arrogant man with a secret is the most predictable man in the world. He'll make a mistake. You just have to be there to catch him when he does. Don't try to prove you're innocent. Find a way to let him prove he's guilty. I hung up the phone, and for the first time in days I felt a flicker of something other than despair. It was a cold, sharp, and intensely focused clarity. My father was right. I had been thinking like an accountant, like a victim. I needed to start thinking like a hunter. Carlton Vance had made a critical error. He hadn't just fired a loyal employee. He had created a motivated, knowledgeable, and now completely invisible enemy. He thought he'd put out the fire. He had no idea I was about to become an arsonist. He had taken away my career, my pension, and my reputation. I was about to take away the only thing he truly valued, his freedom. The game had changed. He just didn't know it yet. The shift in my mind was palpable. The fog of depression and shock burned away, replaced by the cold, clean fire of purpose. My father's words echoed in my head. An arrogant man with a secret is the most predictable man in the world. Carlton Vance wasn't a financial genius. He was a common thief in an expensive suit. And what do thieves do when they think they've gotten away with it? They get sloppy. They celebrate. And most importantly, they destroy the evidence. I couldn't go to the authorities. Not yet. It would be my word, the word of a freshly terminated, disgruntled employee against a powerful CFO with a team of lawyers on retainer. The documents I had seen were digital. They could be altered, deleted, or worse, used to frame me with frightening ease. Vance had already shown his willingness to do that by backdating the transactions. If I went public now, he'd simply claim I was the one who cooked the books and he was the one who heroically discovered it, which was why he had to fire me. It was a checkmate position. He had me. Unless he didn't know the whole board, he was playing chess, but I was the one who had designed the chessboard. I knew every square, every weak point, every hidden trapdoor in the system, but the system was digital, and I no longer had access. The evidence he would want to destroy wouldn't just be a few lines of code. A fraud of this magnitude, spanning years, would have a paper trail. Supporting documents, falsified invoices, signed authorizations, paper trails from before everything was fully digitized. Old habits die hard in big corporations. There would be boxes of files that corroborated the digital fraud. And where would those boxes be? Stored in the company's off-site archival facility. I spent the next 2 days in my workshop, not sanding wood, but rebuilding Sterling Maxwell's operational structure from memory. I drew flowcharts on a large whiteboard. I mapped out departmental procedures, vendor contracts, and payment schedules. I knew every cog in the machine because I had helped build it. Vance would need to get those physical files. He couldn't risk leaving them in a company-controlled facility, not with even the slightest chance of a future audit. And he couldn't shred them in the office. The small departmental shredders were meant for daily paperwork, not for the systematic destruction of hundreds of pounds of documents. Doing that in-house would attract way too much attention, create too many witnesses. No, he would have to hire an outside service, an industrial off-site shredding company, the kind that brings a massive truck and pulverizes everything into confetti. This was his vulnerability. A third-party transaction, a new line item on an expense report, a piece of the puzzle I could find without ever touching a Sterling Maxwell computer. But I needed eyes on the inside. I thought about David. I had told him to keep his head down, and I meant it. Asking him to actively spy for me was a huge risk for both of us. It could get him fired, possibly even implicated. I wrestled with the morality of it for hours. Was my revenge worth his career? The thought was bitter, but then I thought about Vance. I thought about him sitting in his office, smug and secure, having stolen millions and ruined my life. I thought about the other people he would inevitably destroy. Men like Vance don't stop. They just find new victims. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about justice. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but I had to ask. I called David on his personal cell that evening. I kept it casual. How are things? Any more ridiculous buzzword-filled meetings? He sighed. You have no idea, Seth. It's a madhouse. He's got everyone triple-checking reports that were already finalized. He's looking for ghosts. He's terrified. Good, I said. That's a start. Listen, David, I need to ask you for something. And if you say no, I will completely understand, and we will never speak of it again. I could hear the tension in his silence. What is it, Seth? I need you to keep an eye on departmental expense requests, specifically anything coming from Vance's office or his direct reports. I'm not asking you to hack anything or break any rules, just observe. You're a senior accountant, you see these things. I'm looking for something specific, a one-time purchase order, something for document management, secure disposal, archival services, something like that. It'll be a big one, probably a few $1,000s. Why? David asked, his voice barely a whisper. Because I said I think our friend is planning a bonfire, and I want to know when and where he plans to light it. David was quiet for a long time. I could hear him breathing. I was about to tell him to forget it, that it was too much to ask, when he finally spoke. You mentored me for 10 years, Seth. You taught me everything I know about integrity in this business. That man in the corner office doesn't have a shred of it. Tell me exactly what to look for. A wave of relief and gratitude washed over me. I gave him the details, the likely vendor names, the probable cost centers Vance would try to bury it in. I told him to be careful, to look but not to touch, to leave no digital fingerprints. Just get me the information. While I waited, I started on the second part of my plan, the messenger. I couldn't be the one to show up at this bonfire. I had to be miles away, with an ironclad alibi. I needed a proxy, someone with a camera, a microphone, and a deep-seated desire to expose corporate malfeasance. I needed a journalist. I spent hours online scouring the archives of local and national news outlets. I wasn't looking for a talking head from a major network. I was looking for a bulldog, a real investigative reporter who did the grimy, thankless work of digging through public records and chasing down anonymous tips. I found him in the digital pages of a slightly left-leaning but widely respected online journal. His name was Marcus Thorne. He had a track record of breaking stories about political corruption, environmental crimes, and most promisingly, 2 major financial fraud cases. His articles were meticulous, well-researched, and ruthless. He didn't just report the news, he built a case, piece by piece, until the target had nowhere left to hide. He was perfect. Now, how to contact him? An email from my personal account was out of the question. A phone call was too risky. I needed total, absolute anonymity. I drove to a public library in a town 20 miles away. I used one of their computers, a clunky old Dell that smelled faintly of disinfectant, and created a new anonymous email address, a generic untraceable handle, Proton Mail, encrypted. The message had to be perfect. It had to be short enough to be read in seconds, but compelling enough to be undeniable. Journalists like Thorne must get hundreds of crackpot tips a week. Mine had to cut through the noise. It had to be a shard of glass, something so sharp and specific he couldn't ignore it. I typed and deleted for almost an hour. Finally, I had it. Subject, a tip for your collection. Body, no names, no story, just a time and a place. A CFO at a major downtown financial firm is about to orchestrate the destruction of evidence related to a 9-figure tax fraud scheme. He has scheduled an off-site industrial shredder service. The location is the Riverbend Industrial Park, 1450 Loading Bay, 7 Point. 1450 Loading Bay, 7 Point. The time is next Tuesday at precisely 1. The evidence will be in cardboard archive boxes labeled Archives 2020-23. You will see them arrive. You will know what to do. A word of advice, bring federal friends. This is bigger than you think. I read it over a dozen times. It was all there. The what, the where, the when. The tantalizing detail of the box labels. The hook about federal friends. It was a breadcrumb trail that led directly to a feast. It didn't accuse, it simply stated facts. Facts that a good reporter could verify with a single visit. 3 agonizing days passed. I heard nothing. I checked the anonymous email account every hour, my stomach churning. Had he dismissed it as a prank? Was he ignoring it? I started to second-guess myself. Maybe it was too cryptic. Maybe it wasn't enough. I was starting to lose hope. Then on Saturday morning my phone buzzed. It was David. "I've got it," he said, his voice electric with nervous energy. It just came through. A purchase order, signed by Vance's executive assistant, for secure document destruction services, from a company called ProShred. I checked their website. They do on-site industrial shredding with mobile trucks. My heart hammered against my ribs. When, David? When is it? This Tuesday. They have them scheduled for a 1-hour window starting at 1 p.m. I felt a dizzying wave of vindication. It was real. My prediction, my plan, it was all falling into place. "Where?" I asked, my voice tight. "That's the crazy part," he said. "They're not doing it here. The work order specifies an off-site location, some warehouse they're leasing over in the Riverbend Industrial Park, Loading Bay 7. I almost dropped the phone. It was the exact location I had sent to Marcus Thorne. I hadn't known the address for sure. I had researched Sterling Maxwell's property leases and made an educated guess based on which of their secondary properties had the most discreet access. My guess had been right. It was a sign, a confirmation from the universe that I was on the right path. "Thanks, David," I said, my voice filled with a gratitude so immense it was hard to speak. "Now listen to me. This is the most important part. You delete any record of our calls. You forget this conversation ever happened. You are an accountant who noticed an unusual expense, and that is all. You are a witness, not a conspirator. Do you understand?" "I understand, Seth. Good luck." I hung up the phone and walked over to my whiteboard. I looked at the flow charts, the timelines, the intricate web of my plan. It was no longer a theory. It was a living, breathing thing. I had built the trap. I had baited it, and now the target was walking straight towards it, completely unaware. All I had to do was wait for the snap. The next 72 hours would be the longest of my life. The silence was about to be broken, not by me, but by the sound of a guilty man's world coming crashing down. The day of the raid, I woke up before dawn. Sleep had been a fitful, shallow thing. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those archive boxes, the black stenciled letters burning in my mind. Archives 2020-23. It was the tombstone of Carlton Vance's career. He just hadn't read the inscription yet. I couldn't stay in the house. The walls felt like they were closing in. Maria knew something was happening. She didn't ask what, but she watched me with that look of quiet, steady support that had been my anchor for 30 years. She just made me coffee, packed me a thermos, and said, "Be careful, Seth." That was all. My plan for the day was simple: be seen. I needed an alibi, not just for the moment of the raid, but for the entire day. I drove to a popular state park about an hour in the opposite direction from the Riverbend Industrial Park. I paid the entrance fee with a credit card, creating a time-stamped digital record of my location. I went for a long hike on a well-traveled trail, nodding to other hikers, making myself visible but not memorable. Just another middle-aged guy in a fleece vest, getting some exercise. All the while, my mind was miles away, picturing a loading bay and a news van. At precisely 12:45 p.m., I found a scenic overlook, a place with a clear view, and most importantly, a handful of other people. I sat on a bench, poured a cup of coffee from my thermos, and took out my phone. I called my dad in Florida. "Hey, Pop, just wanted to see how you were doing." We talked for 20 minutes about his hip, about the weather, about the annoying new president of his condo association. It was a perfectly normal, mundane conversation, but it was a conversation that was creating a cell phone tower ping, placing my physical location far from the city, time-stamped and logged by the phone company. It was another brick in my wall of deniability. As we were talking, I saw a park ranger walk by. I smiled and waved. He nodded back. Another witness. I hung up at 1:05 p.m. It was done. Or it was happening. One way or another, the tip had been delivered, the players were in position. Now it was all in the hands of Marcus Thorne, a man I had never met, never spoken to, but in whom I had placed my entire faith. The drive home was excruciating. I didn't turn on the radio. I couldn't bear to hear a news report, and I couldn't bear not to. I was suspended in a state of quantum uncertainty. In one reality, I was a genius. In the other, I was a fool who had sent a crazy email to a journalist who had promptly deleted it. I got home around 3 o'clock. The house was empty. Maria was out running errands. The silence was absolute. I sat in my armchair in the living room, staring out the window, waiting for what, I didn't know. A phone call, a news alert, a knock on the door from federal agents who had somehow traced the anonymous email back to me. Every passing car on the street made my heart jump. At 4:17 p.m., my personal cell phone, the one I had kept quiet for days, rang. It was David. I answered on the first ring. His voice was a torrent, a chaotic whisper of pure adrenaline. "Seth." "Oh my God, Seth. It happened. It actually happened." "What happened, David? Tell me exactly." "They're here," he said. "Federal agents. IRS, FBI, I don't know. They came in about an hour ago. They went straight to Vance's office. They had a warrant. They're seizing everything. His computers, his files, everything. The whole top floor is on lockdown. What about the shredder? What about the boxes?" "That's the craziest part, Seth. Jessica Vance's assistant, the one who signed the PO, she went to the industrial park herself. Vance must have sent her to oversee the destruction. According to the rumors flying around, she got there and a news crew was waiting for her, a camera in her face. She was unloading the boxes from her car when they swarmed her, and right behind them were the feds. They say she fainted, just collapsed right there on the loading dock. They have the boxes, Seth. They have everything." I closed my eyes, a wave of profound, bone-deep relief washing over me. It had worked. It had worked perfectly. Marcus Thorne hadn't just come. He had come prepared. He'd brought the cavalry. "What's happening with Vance?" I asked. "He's locked in his office with 2 agents and a company lawyer. I saw them escort him in. He looked gray, like a ghost. All that arrogance, all that smug confidence just gone. He looked like a scared little man, Seth. The CEO, Mr. Sterling, came out of his office. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in an hour. No one knows what to do. The whole company is just..." I listened as David recounted the scene, the stunned silence in the cubicle farms, the hushed panicked whispers, the sight of stern-faced agents and windbreakers carrying out servers and document boxes, The machine I had so carefully maintained for 25 years was grinding to a halt, choked by the corruption of one man and the quiet, calculated revenge of another. "Thank you, David," I said, my voice steady. "Now more than ever, you know nothing. You saw nothing. You are just as shocked as everyone else." "Don't worry," he said. "Acting shocked is the easiest thing I've had to do all day." He hung up. I sat there in the silence of my living room, the late afternoon sun streaming through the window. It wasn't a feeling of triumph. It wasn't a fist-pumping yes moment. It was quieter than that. It was the feeling of a great weight being lifted. The vindication was cold, clean, and absolute. I hadn't thrown a single punch. I hadn't raised my voice. I had simply given a guilty man enough rope. And he had, with meticulous, arrogant precision, hung himself with it. The first phase was over. Vance was caught. But my real work, the work of rebuilding my life from the ashes of my old one, was just beginning. And I had a feeling a lot of very talented people were about to be looking for a new place to land. The news broke publicly the next morning. It wasn't a leak, it was a bombshell. Marcus Thorne's story was the headline on his journal's homepage, complete with a stunning photograph. It showed a pale, terrified-looking young woman, Jessica, the assistant, standing frozen between a stoic federal agent and a cardboard box clearly labeled Archives 2023. The camera had caught the precise moment her world and Carlton Vance's had shattered. The article was a masterclass in journalistic demolition. Thorne laid out the timeline, the anonymous tip, the arrival of the shredding truck, and the dramatic intervention by the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. He didn't have all the details of the fraud yet, but he had the cover-up, red-handed and on camera. The story named Carlton Vance as the target of the investigation. Sterling Maxwell's stock, when the market opened, didn't just dip, it plummeted. It was a free fall, a catastrophic loss of investor confidence. They had spent a fortune on PR firms to build a reputation of unshakable stability, and it was all undone by one photograph of a cardboard box. My phone started ringing before 9 a.m. and didn't stop. The first calls were from former colleagues, people from my old team who had been let go in Vance's restructuring. They called with a mixture of shock and unconcealed glee. They knew, without knowing how they knew, that I was somehow behind it. The most important call came around lunchtime. It was David. He had resigned that morning. I walked into HR, handed them my letter, and walked out, he said. "The place is a morgue, Seth. Everyone who's any good is polishing their resume. The rats are scrambling for the lifeboats. They know the ship is going down." "Good for you, David," I said. "It took guts." "No," he said. "Staying would have taken guts. This was just common sense. So the real question is, what are we doing next?" "What do you mean we?" I asked, though I knew exactly what he meant. "Come on, Seth, you can't be the only one who sees this. Sterling Maxwell is about to lose every client with a brain. Their best people are about to be on the street. All these companies are going to need expert financial consulting, and the firm they used to trust is now a federal crime scene. There's a void, a massive gaping void in the market, and you're the one person who can fill it." The idea had been germinating in the back of my mind, a small tentative seed, but hearing David say it out loud with such conviction made it feel real, possible. We talked for an hour, sketching out the bones of a plan, a new firm, a small elite consultancy. No corner offices, no buzzwords, just unparalleled competence and unimpeachable integrity. We would be the anti-Sterling Maxwell. Our slogan could be, "We actually know what we're doing." Over the next week, the exodus began. It was a slow trickle at first, then a flood. The best accountants, the sharpest analysts, the most experienced project managers, all people who had either been pushed out by Vance or were smart enough to see the writing on the wall, resigned. And one by one they called me. It was humbling. They weren't just looking for a job, they were looking for a leader. They were looking for the stability and integrity that had been ripped out of their professional lives. They trusted me. That trust was a greater asset than any line of credit or venture capital funding. Then came the call I had been waiting for. It came from an unknown number, a blocked ID. I answered, and the voice on the other end was one I would never forget. It was Carlton Vance. But the arrogant, condescending tone was gone. It had been replaced by a thin, reedy whine of pure desperation. "Seth, it's Carlton. We need to talk." I said nothing. I just let the silence hang in the air, a weapon in itself. "Listen," he said, his voice cracking. "There's been a terrible misunderstanding, a clerical error. Things have gotten out of control. I can fix this, Seth. I've spoken to the board. We can undo it. We can make this right. Your job, it's yours. A promotion, vice chairman of the board, whatever you want. We just need you to come in and help us clarify the situation. Tell them you were working on a special project for me. An internal audit simulation. Tell them the documents were part of a stress test." I almost laughed. A stress test? That was the best he could come up with. He was offering me a promotion to help him commit perjury. The audacity was breathtaking. "Is that all, Carlton?" I asked, my voice as cold and flat as a frozen lake. "No. Don't you hang up," he shrieked, the panic boiling over. "If you don't help me, I'll tell them you were in on it. I'll tell them you masterminded the whole thing and tried to frame me when I found you out. I'll ruin you, Seth. I'll drown you in lawsuits." There it was, the cornered animal lashing out with threats and bluster. It was the last desperate move of a man who had already lost. "Carlton," I said calmly, letting each word land with deliberate weight, "I have no idea what you're talking about. I was terminated over a week ago. I haven't had access to company property or systems since the moment you had me escorted from the building. I'd suggest you direct any further questions to your lawyers. I'm sure you'll be spending a lot of time with them." Before he could respond, I hung up. I blocked his number. The power shift was complete. He had gone from the man who held my life in his hands to a pathetic voice on the phone begging for my help to cover his crimes. He had nothing. His threats were empty. My alibi was rock solid. My hands were clean. His were covered in ink and filth. They had mistaken my quiet dedication for weakness. Now they were learning the true nature of my strength. It wasn't in what I could build, it was in what I understood. And I understood better than anyone just how fragile their whole corrupt empire really was. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of controlled chaos. While Sterling Maxwell was imploding in a very public and spectacular fashion, my team and I were quietly building. We leased a small functional office space, no frills, just good lighting and fast internet. We incorporated as Harrison Strategy Group, my name on the door. It felt strange and deeply, profoundly satisfying. My father, when I told him the name, just chuckled. "About time," he said. Our first clients came faster than we could have ever hoped. They were the crown jewels of Sterling Maxwell's portfolio, the ones with long-standing relationships that had been built on trust. Trust in the teams I had led, not in the corporate logo. The CEO of a major manufacturing company, a man I'd worked with for 15 years, called me directly. "Seth," he said, "no preamble. I just read about the mess at your old shop. I'm pulling our account. The question is, are you ready to take it on? My board is nervous, but I told them, I don't trust Sterling Maxwell. I trust Seth Harrison." That one phone call was worth more than any marketing campaign. It was validation. It was the ultimate return on an investment I'd been making my whole career, my reputation. We took them on, and 2 others followed within a week. We were working 14-hour days, not out of desperation, but out of passion. We were building something from the ground up, our way. There were no pointless meetings, no corporate politics, no arrogant executives playing with other people's lives. It was just good people doing good work. It was honest. The final act of the Sterling Maxwell drama played out in the business section of the papers, not in my life. The federal investigation, fueled by the mountain of evidence they'd seized from that loading dock, was swift and brutal. Carlton Vance was indicted on multiple counts of wire fraud, tax evasion, and obstruction of justice. His photo, this time a mugshot, was a satisfying bookend to the one Marcus Thorne had published. He looked small, defeated, and utterly ordinary without his expensive suit and corner office. The CEO, Mr. Sterling, was forced to resign in disgrace after it was revealed he had received substantial undeclared bonuses funneled through the fraudulent offshore accounts. He claimed ignorance, but the evidence was overwhelming. He was a willing beneficiary, if not an active participant. The company itself, once a titan of the financial world, was fatally wounded, stripped of its best talent, its most valuable clients, and its reputation. It was carved up and sold for parts to a larger competitor for pennies on the dollar. The name Sterling Maxwell, once a symbol of prestige and power, was now a cautionary tale, a synonym for hubris and collapse. They had thought I was a line item on a budget, an expense to be cut. They found out too late that I wasn't an expense. I was the foundation. And when you rip out the foundation, the house doesn't stand for very long. My final confrontation, if you could call it that, wasn't with Vance. It was with my own past. About 6 months after we started Harrison Strategy Group, I had to go downtown for a meeting. On my way back to the car, my route took me past the towering glass and steel monolith that was the Sterling Maxwell building. A new logo was already being installed over the main entrance. I stopped on the sidewalk across the street and just looked at it. The place where I had spent more of my waking hours than my own home. I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no nostalgia. It was just a building, a place, the ghost of a life I no longer lived. My real life was in the small, bright office a few miles away, surrounded by a team I respected and who respected me. It was in the evenings at home with Maria, with the stress of a toxic workplace finally lifted from my shoulders. It was in the phone calls with my dad, where I could tell him with pride that his son had built something of his own. I turned away from the building and walked away, not looking back. I didn't get revenge by burning their house down. I simply exposed the rot in their foundation and let the laws of gravity do the rest. They had tried to erase me, but in doing so, they had set me free. They had handed me a blank page, and I was finally writing my own story. My silence had been mistaken for weakness, but in the end, my quiet, calculated actions had spoken louder than any of their angry, panicked words ever could, and that was the most profound vindication of all. So that's my story. It's a story about numbers on a spreadsheet, but it's really about a number being done on a person. My name is Seth Harrison, and I was made redundant. I was erased. I was deemed a legacy cost in a new, dynamic paradigm. They thought my 25 years of loyalty was a chain they could rattle, but it turned out it was just a choice I made every day. And on the day they fired me, they were the ones who made a new choice for me. They chose to turn a loyal watchdog into a wolf. They mistook my experience for an expense and my silence for surrender. It's a mistake that a lot of companies make. They look at the people who built the place, the ones with the institutional knowledge and the quiet competence, and they see a cost instead of an asset. They forget that a business isn't a collection of assets and algorithms. It's a collection of people. And when you betray the right people or the wrong ones, depending on your perspective, you find out just how quickly the whole structure can come down. They thought they were just getting rid of one old accountant. They had no idea they were actually firing the man who held the blueprint. If you've ever felt that way, if you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or erased in your own career, then you know this story isn't just about me. It's about anyone who has ever poured their heart and soul into their work, only to be told they're no longer needed. It's a reminder that your true value isn't determined by a title or a salary, but by your integrity, your knowledge, and your character. And those are things no one can ever take from you. Remember that competence isn't cheap, but it's a hell of a lot more expensive when you lose it. If this story resonated with you, let me know what you think down in the comments. I read them all, and if you've got a story of your own, I'd love to hear it. Like this video if you believe that in the end, competence wins. Share it with anyone who needs to be reminded of their own worth. And make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications for more stories about how the quiet ones, the ones who do the real work, finally get heard. Thank you for listening.